welcome and shalom to all our guests. I hope everyone can hear me. Welcome to the 7th session of Water Impact 2021. This session is particularly dedicated to wastewater and treatment of wastewater. And for this, we have two distinguished guests. The first one being Dr. Alex Fruman from Technion of Israel, and the second one being our dear friend Vishwanath from Bangalore. We will start off with Dr. Alex Fruman, who is actually going to talk to us about a unique technology that has been present in Israel for many years. I do not know whether it has been used on the scale that it has been used in Israel. And he's going to take us through soil aquifer treatment. Dr. Fruman, it's over to you.
Hey, thanks, ROMIEL. Let me just share my screen. Okay, so thanks for hosting me again. It's my pleasure to virtually at least be in India. And I'm going to talk today about something that we call soil aquifer treatment, which is one of the methods that we use in Israel as a tertiary treatment for wastewater. And to a large degree, this is really the one thing or the main thing that makes the wastewater in Israel of a relatively high quality that makes it usable for any type of crop. We can irrigate with it almost any crop, and it's not only that we declare that, the European Union also declares this water as appropriate for any crop, and they consider crops irrigated by such water as being irrigated by tap water. So the quality is really, really high, and I'll try in the next 30 minutes or so to show you the general idea and get you a little bit at least familiar with the concept, and hopefully you're going to see and understand how it works and maybe apply that in India as well. I'm going to use this picture that was taken at a facility that we call Shafdan, the main facility that treats the wastewater of the entire Tel Aviv metropolitan area. This is located a little bit south of Tel Aviv. And what you see here is a pond, roughly in size about 200 meters length and about 60 meters wide. And what you see here is the inlet of the pond. I hope you can see my marker. And the pond generally is being flooded intermittently. So flooded for a day, dried for a couple of days, flooded again for a day, dried for one more day. And what you can see here in the background is another pond that at the moment is empty. It even has some weeds that grow in the pond. And basically we switch the water from flooding this one to flooding this one to flooding another one so that we keep the potential of infiltration of the water at all times, but we let some of the ponds dry essentially, and you'll see later why this is important. So those of you who attended my lecture a couple of weeks ago already know that Israel uses a lot of the wastewater. And if we look at the total water resources of Israel, we have a little bit more than 1 billion cubic meter per year that is of natural resources like aquifers and surface water. And potentially we have something like 600 million cubic meters that are being used from secondary sources or from marginal sources, and that's primarily wastewater. In addition to that, we have at the moment capacity of a bit more than 600 million cubic meter per year of desalination. Now, this is the total capacity. In total, the use in Israel now is something like 2.3 billion cubic meters per year. So quite a significant part of the water, and mostly water for irrigation, comes from marginal sources, and especially the reuse of treated wastewater. What you can see on this map, that I apologize, it's in Hebrew, but what you see here is Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and Haifa, which is where the Technion is located. And the red lines that you see here, like this one here and the red line here, and several other small lines, those are pipes containing treated wastewater. So you can see that we have actually quite a wide network of pipes that deliver the wastewater after treatment from the big cities to the consumption areas, in this case, for example, in the western Negev, which is the south of Israel. So basically, we use a lot of the wastewater, and in order to do that, we need to bring the water into a relatively high quality. So what is soil aquifer treatment? Basically, we take the wastewater that is generated in the cities or in the villages, wherever it's generated, and we treat them conventionally in some of the techniques that the second talk is going to probably talk about to some degree. So the wastewater is being treated typically in an activated sludge type of facility, and it's brought to what we call secondary treatment. So basically nitrification, denitrification, removal of much of the organic matter from the wastewater. The soil aquifer treatment, at least in Israel, comes after that. There are a few places in the world that the soil aquifer treatment is replacing the conventional treatment, but those are quite rare and the quality is quite low over there. The one that I'm familiar with is in Mexico. But in Israel, and there are several other places that are doing more or less the same. For example, in Tucson, Arizona, what we do is soil aquifer treatment as a tertiary treatment of the wastewater. And it's what some people may call a nature-based solution. So it's a solution that is quite natural, not perfectly natural, but based on very natural processes. Basically, we take the wastewater after treatment, let them infiltrate through a very thick veduzone. Basically, that's a dune. In Israel, that's about 30 meters of sandy dune. We let the water infiltrate. It accumulates in the aquifer below. And after some time, we simply pump it again and send it for irrigation typically after sanitation, after disinfection with chlorine or whatever process we decide. So basically what we have is a process that further purifies the wastewater. And in this veduzone, there are biochemical processes that continues the treatment of the wastewater, such as nitrification and denitrification, but not only. And eventually the water is being stored in the aquifer for the season where it's needed. So wastewater is generated all year round, but the wastewater or the water for irrigation is needed only in the summer. So the soil aquifer treatment not only treats the water, but it also allows us quite significant storage of the water between winter and summer. On the average, at least in Israel, the water is stored in the aquifer something between 3 and 6 months before it's being used. But the process of infiltration is relatively short. It takes only a few days for the water to percolate through this veduzone. So that's basically the general technique that we're applying, and we apply it in Israel in one big facility south of Tel Aviv. It treats almost all the wastewater of the Tel Aviv metropolitan area. And the problem is, and I hope that you've seen that in the picture before, and we'll see that picture in a second again. The problem is that those facilities are close to Tel Aviv, close to the cities. Land is expensive, and we need a way to do it more efficiently. And why is that? Again, I apologize that this plot is to some degree in Hebrew. What we see here is the development of this facility over the years. And you can see that the amount of wastewater more or less was equivalent to the development of the project itself in terms of capacity. But the projection for the future is that the amount of wastewater is going to increase quite dramatically, while the capacity in terms of land is limited. We cannot really increase the facility anymore because there's competition for the land. Nobody's going to allow building new ponds in order to increase the infiltration of the system. So just to summarize more or less the challenges that we're facing, we need to increase infiltration. But basically, we need to increase infiltration without causing a deterioration of the water quality. We do understand generally how the system behaves, but we do not understand it in a level that allows us to control the system, to make it more a controlled process. And we know already, and I didn't show it, but I'll show it a little bit later, there's quite a significant role of entrapter in the process of air that is entrapped in the soil itself. So what are the measures that we take as researchers in order to deal with that? We address that in several options, and I'm going to show mostly two of those. First of all, we developed a monitoring system that allows us to understand how the process behaves or how the system behaves in the deep subsurface, not only at the surface and not only at the treatment facility, but also in the subsurface. We studied the redox facility, the redox dynamics in the subsurface, and we use those redox dynamics in order to perhaps optimize the operation of the system. At the moment, we have optimization of the system in lab scale, and the challenge now is to go with that to the actual field and to create a better scheme that would allow more optimal type of system dynamics. And last, and I'm not going to talk about that, I'm just going to, in the last slide, just talk about a few ideas that we have, which is some alternatives for the system, some improvements of soil-aquifer treatment. So back to the picture, just to show you where the city is. Specifically, in this case, that's the city of Yavne, which is a small city south of Tel Aviv. And you can see that the city is almost already at the edge of those ponds, which means that we cannot really get any further land. Nobody is going to allow the company that operates the site get more land. And even more than that, people are afraid that this is going to bring mosquitoes and or create some odors and make the lives of the people here, let's call it miserable. It's not true, but that's their fear because they think about wastewater. So what we're going to talk about, and I mentioned it, we're going to talk mostly about real-time monitoring, and we're going to talk mostly about operational optimization. So just to show you where we are, again, this is Tel Aviv, this is Jerusalem, that's the West Bank, the Dead Sea, the deepest place on Earth. And we work in those ponds that are located south of Tel Aviv, between the city of Tel Aviv, or between the metropolitan area of Tel Aviv, which is more or less this region, and the city of Ashdod. And we're working in one of the pond clusters. Specifically, we're working in one of the ponds. But I want to show this cluster and highlight something. Basically, what we do is let treated wastewater infiltrate into an aquifer that is actually being used. And that's, from the health point of view, that's a concern. You do not want a wastewater which is of low quality to mix with groundwater that is of high quality. So what Israel did is develop a special system of monitoring and extraction pumps. If we have this cluster of ponds, somewhere around it, about 500 meters around it, there's going to be a series of pumps, some of them monitoring pumps, but most of them are pumping pumps that create a situation that the hydraulic gradient is always towards this region. So, so that the wastewater, even though it's a treated wastewater and even a very high quality wastewater, it's not going to be mixed with the groundwater that is being used for drinking. So there's a very gentle hydraulic control of the entire system, and we need to maintain always gradient actually towards the center of this region and not out of the center. So that's one of the biggest, perhaps, hydrological challenges. On one hand, we infiltrate water and we create a groundwater mound, but on the other hand, we need to maintain gradient, or actually in the other direction, to lower the hydraulic heads at least around the system, so that the water is not going to mix further. So the first thing that I'm going to show is a geophysical study, and we're using a technology called electrical resistivity tomography. Basically, we measure the electrical resistivity of the subsurface. And what we did, we laid 3 lines, each of 96 electrodes. You can see here in blue one, we can see here in green a second one, and here in red a short one with electrodes closer together. And basically what we do is measure the electrical conductivity between pairs of electrodes or quadrupole of electrodes. And after we have all the data, we also go through a process that is called inversion, which means to solve the flow of electricity in the subsurface in order to better map the subsurface. What I'm going to show you is mostly results, or almost only results, from the short red line that is further away from the inlet. This is where we insert the water into the pond, so the water would flow in this direction and slowly infiltrate, and we're going to show results from this section only. This is a preliminary map of geophysical mapping of the entire pond, or a significant part of the pond, and you can see what geophysics can tell you. Basically, red means of high electrical resistivity, and blue means low electrical resistivity, which means blue basically is wet, red is basically dry. So that's a situation at one time in point, a specific time and before we started experiments, but that's just to give you an idea of what we can do. And what we did is using the 96 electrodes that are buried in the subsurface, buried in very shallow depth, we tracked 4 different infiltration events. Every one of the first 2 was more or less 24 hours with 48 hours break. And then 2 short ones, each 12 hours with 24 hours break in between them. And just to show you what we can do in real time, just a second. For some reason, okay, there it goes. So what you can see is basically in real time, the time here, every time step is less than 1 hour. Closer to half an hour, and you can see that we actually can see the dynamics of the entire pond, about 50 meters in this case by 10 meters depth. We can see it practically in real time. Now, why this is important? The operation of the pond at the moment is based on very simple rule of thumbs. The operator of the pond, let me just play it again. The operator of the pond knows I'm flooding the pond for 24 hours and then I'm drying it for 48 hours. But who said 24 hours and 48 hours are the right times? What we suggest is, for example, that in the summer you need to dry for shorter time because the soil dries much faster, while in the winter you need to dry perhaps for longer time. So basically what we developed here is a tool that allows us to see what's going on in the pond in real time. Now, tomography is a relatively sophisticated type of measurement, but what we can show is also that using the very simple electrical resistivity measurement without any tomography, basically 2 electrodes connected to a voltmeter and ampermeter, we can get a lot of data, and every one of the lines that you see in this figure is based on electrodes that are located in different separations. So the red ones, for example, the ones on top, is data that is collected using electrodes that are only half a meter apart, while the blue ones, for example, are based on electrodes that are 10 meters apart. So using very simple electrodes that you can put as part of the infrastructure of the site, you can get to quite high resolution and quite good understanding of the system with equipment that is really simple, just a voltmeter and ampermeter, basically, and a few wires. So that's one aspect of what we were doing, developing basically a monitoring system that shows the hydraulics of the system. And as you will see in a few minutes, the hydraulics actually control much of the other parts of the system. The second part of our work is looking more into the biochemistry, because all the relevant processes are not only physical but also biochemical. And what we did is develop an in-situ monitoring system or monitoring stations in the site where we look at different parameters, for example, redox, which is the oxidation reduction potential, and we look at oxygen. So I'm not going to talk about the raw data, but all I'm going to show you at this point is that the data is really dynamic. So the ORP, for example, drops during the night and then goes up during the day, down during the night and up during the day, not necessarily in accordance to the water level. So there are many parameters that control that, and we believe that the ORP is one parameter that can be used in order to better understand how the system behaves, because it captures everything together. I'm not sure where this is coming from, this yellow line, but I hope you can ignore it. So we monitor the site for a few years, and we know quite well now how the system behaves. We know how the system behaves above ground, and we know how the system behaves below ground. And we can capture different, for example, we place different stations, different monitoring stations along the pond, and we know what kind of redox we should expect according to the wetting period, to the wetting time, or according to the drying time. And so we got quite a good empirical understanding of the system. And the next stage was to try to put that into some mathematical format or some modeling format that would allow us model all the processes and optimize the operation of the site. So what we did is develop with colleagues in Germany, we developed this very long column. This is 6-meter soil column filled with soil from the sites that we have in Israel. And we ran several different experiments using wastewater with different drying, wetting, or wetting, drying periods. The system is full with many sensors that measure oxygen and redox and water content and whatever. And we have also the ability to sample waters all along the column and also at the bottom of the column. So when we run the system, we can monitor whatever we want. In this case, we run it for several cycles of wetting and drying, and we measure the water content in different depths, just for idea. And at the same time, we measure the dissolved oxygen, which is the dashed lines that you see here. So you can see, for example, that the dissolved oxygen is more dynamic close to the surface, while it's more flat at the depth. And this one is at about 5.5 meters deep depth. You can see that it's dropping slowly, but basically we do not see anymore, or almost do not see the fluctuations, the daily fluctuations or the hourly fluctuations that we have at the surface. And if we look, for example, in this case at oxygen, comparing one part where the drying period was 150 minutes compared to a drying period of 240 minutes, so 2.5 hours compared to 4 hours of drying, you can see how the oxygen responds. So for example, in the first part, the oxygen drops quite dramatically, but once we increase the drying period, the oxygen goes up again. And if you think about it, it's quite trivial, but we put numbers behind what we do. And basically what we show is once you have long enough drying period, for example, you have oxidizing conditions, so plenty of oxygen here, while in this case, at least what you can see here is numbers that are relatively low, which probably mean that you do not have enough oxygen for oxidizing, and you need to oxidize, for example, nitrate, which means that energetically it's way less efficient, and you're probably going to treat your wastewater to lesser quality. So this was nice, and we can support that with also hard measurement of, for example, ammonium and nitrate at the bottom of the system, and total nitrogen. You can see, for example, that the blue ones here, which is the experiment with the longer drying period, has much, much lower nitrogen species altogether compared to the shorter period, which means that we have basically much better removal rate of nitrogen, and the same with the organic carbon. We have much better removal of carbon in the longer drying period. So this was great, and we can even show that qualitatively it matches the measurement of the field. And the next step was to develop a model that would capture everything. So basically, we have in the model water flow, we have solute transport, looking mostly at nitrogen, carbon, and oxygen. We have reactions like nitrification, denitrification, mineralization, and so on. And we need also to include the microbial phase, which is really the one part that is doing all the part. And what we realized at some point is that we need also to consider gas flow. We cannot assume that oxygen is available or that gas is available everywhere and just rely on gas being the complementary of the water content. We need also to model the oxygen transport in the subsurface. And in addition to that, we need, and that's something that we still didn't do, we need also to consider surface processes. For example, we have in the pond itself a lot of algae that actually generate oxygen. So in terms of the mathematics, and I'm gonna go really briefly about it. We have a Richards equation for water flow. We have advection dispersion for multiple species like nitrogen species and carbon species. We have multiple reactions. We have gas transfer between the gas phase and the liquid phase. We have microbial type of logistics of growth and functionality. And using that model, what we did next is calibrate the model. We took the measurement that we have from the laboratory and calibrated the model. And once we calibrate the model, we can run also several other scenarios. The model, the experiment, if you remember, we considered only two cases of drying periods of 150 minutes and drying periods of 240 minutes. But once the model is calibrated, we can play with multiple other scenarios. For example, we played in this case with 7 different cases of drying period. We're showing only 4 of them. And what's interesting is if you see here, that's depth and ammonium concentration. What you see is, for example, that for the 80 minutes drying period, which practically means that the soil is never fully dry, all processes, all nitrification processes are taking place only in the upper 25 centimeters. Beyond that, there simply is not enough oxygen. So for every drying period, what we get is really a different volume of the column or different volume of the subsurface that takes part in the process. So basically, by changing the drying period, we really change not only the efficiency of the process, we also change the volume of the so-called reactor. If we think about the soil as a reactor, by changing the drying period, we change also the volume of the reactor. So that's not enough. What we want to do is to get an optimization. So basically, once we increase the drying period, it also means that we infiltrate less water. So what we did is took from the model for different drying periods, and every drying period is actually associated to an infiltration rate. Basically, we have nitrate as a function of the wetting, and we also have organic carbon and ammonium as a function of the time that we allow for wetting and time that we allow for drying. And if you think about those 3 curves, if you put them together with some weighting, some weight given to every one of them, you get some sort of an optimization. And this is exactly what we got. And we got to the conclusion that infiltration amount that is normalized to something like 1/3, which means basically 1/3 of the time allowing water to infiltrate, 2/3 of the time allowing drying. That's more or less where we're going to be at the optimum for this specific case, for this laboratory experiment. So that was very nice, and the challenge now is how to transfer that into the field. And in the field, we have different problems. For example, this is a picture. Sorry, okay, for some reason it's not working, but never mind. You can see all the bubbles. Once you're in the field, you have also movement of the air that is captured below the ground and cannot go further down and has to go up. And the air has a lot of influence on the processes. On one hand, it impedes the infiltration. On the other hand, we really need this air for the oxidation. So it's a big question of how to deal with it. And the way we deal with it is by having the soil not flat. If we have a flat surface, the air cannot really escape. And once we have something like that, we realize that this actually allows the air to escape. And if to explain that conceptually, basically that's what we have at the surface. So think about a step or a furrow at the surface. What this allows is infiltration from one side, an easier escape of the air from the other side, and by that you can increase infiltration. But of course, it might be at the expense of biochemical activity. So that's more or less what I wanted to talk about, and I want to ask you a question to see if you captured what I was running through in the last 30 minutes. And can you put the poll up, just to see if you got something from me, and please see if you can what you think about soil aquifer treatment. What's the main advantage of it? Okay. Okay, I guess almost everybody answered. So most of you were correct, and the right answer is that soil aquifer treatment gives us actually two things. It gives us both treatment of the wastewater to very high quality, but it also provides us with storage. Try to think about it. At least the site in Israel is of the size of, it generates something like 130 million cubic meters per year. The alternative of storing those water in Israel above ground would mean that you lose almost everything due to evaporation. Israel is mostly a desert or semi-desert. The south of Israel is a desert. Storing the water above ground would mean that you simply lose all the water or much of the water to evaporation. And by losing water for evaporation, you also create a salinity problem. So the storage that soil aquifer treatment allows us is really of high value. But of course, the general and the basic goal of soil aquifer treatment is really the purification of the wastewater, making it a tertiary treatment. So just to summarize, what we've seen is that we've seen two things. One of them is that soil aquifer treatment can be seen as a pseudo-reactor. We can control it to some degree. We showed it in the lab. We still need to show it in the field, but basically by controlling the hydraulic operation, we can control to some degree the functionality of the system. And we can use very simple resistivity measurement in order to understand the hydraulics, not only from what are available or not available at the surface, but operate according to the actual state of the subsurface. Several things that we're doing in parallel, and that might be interesting. We just published the first paper on that. We're trying to use agricultural orchard as a facility, as an alternative for recharge land. What we do is infiltrate the water mostly in the winter, when there's more water, And we're checking at the moment if the orchard, if the trees are affected by being flooded for relatively long parts of the winter. We're not flooding for more than a day or two at a time, but we still need to check this option. Another option that we're checking at the moment only in the lab is to inject air into the system while recharging. That would allow us increase the time that we infiltrate the water. We look at several alternatives for a pre-treatment of the water, either through filters or through wetlands, or through a top layer that increases dramatically the biological activity at the top layer. So that's it, more or less. I hope you captured something, at least according to the poll, most of you did. And I'll be happy to answer questions.
Thank you so much, Alex. I mean, lots of questions, unfortunately, but very short time. So I'll just take a couple of them quickly that we can sort of take on. One of the key issues that you have talked about is what controls, Ravi Mariwal asked, what controls the infiltration rate? What role does porosity play in the bed plate? And can this actually, what are the specific kind of soils that this kind of treatment can be used in?
Okay. So naturally, you can do it only when you have a soil that is of high permeability. In Israel, we do it in a very sandy soil, but it's not, and that's one of the things that we learned in the while modeling the system. For example, if you do it in gravel, it's probably not going to function because you need not only high infiltration, you need some balance between high infiltration or high permeability, but also decent retention of the water. You need to keep the water to some time exposed to oxygen. Otherwise, the water would go very fast to the subsurface and the processes would not be fast enough. You'll get the wastewater immediately in the groundwater where oxygen availability is too low. So I guess in Israel, we had kind of beginner's luck. We chose a land that has a decent infiltration, but still decent enough retention. So sand, but not pure sand. Sand that contains some fine grains. So somewhere in between. It probably requires some more balance. We're working at the moment with a group in Germany on developing a tool, a mathematical tool that would allow very, very basic pre-assessment of sites that are suitable for soil-aquifer treatment, using mostly hydraulic properties of the soil. The short answer is typically sand, but not too coarse sand.
Excellent. One of the other issues which you have not spoken about is what is the post-treatment that would be required after this is drawn out. That's one question. And the last one is comparative cost by Israeli standards. What would be the comparative cost to treat this kind of water from the conventional treatment or tertiary treatment schemes?
Okay, so regarding post-treatment, that's very easy. Since the water comes from an aquifer, it's already filtered. So all you need to do, and that's mostly in terms of health issues, is sanitation. You need to chlorinize, that's all. No further treatment is needed. The water is already of quite high quality, and almost nothing is needed other than sanitation. And even sanitation, it's really to prevent health risks. Basically, the water is of high quality. I would not tell people to do that, but if you drink the water, nothing is going to happen to you probably. So that's in terms of the post-treatment. In terms of cost, first of all, you need to remember that this is only the tertiary treatment. The primary and secondary treatment are done anyway because you have to do it anyway. You cannot throw wastewater to the environment. You need to treat the water anyway. So the cost of the primary and secondary treatment is not laid on the farmer. It's laid on the municipality, basically. The additional cost here is almost nothing as long as you do not consider the cost of the land. The site itself is operating 130 million cubic per year, 2 people. That's all.
Okay.
Almost nothing. So of course you need to bring contractors from time to time if you need to repair a well or to fix something. But on the maintenance, the general maintenance is done by 2 people. The cost is nothing, of course, if you exclude the cost of the land itself. Other than that, there's the cost of shipping the water from the center of Israel to the south. So that's a cost of energy and the pipe network for that. But the site itself, it's just initial work of all laying down all the ponds and all the piping system and all the pumps, but maintenance is almost nothing. So I don't know the number, but I would estimate it, the additional cost of the treatment, maybe 1 cent per cubic meter. Almost nothing. The alternative is really membranes or some ultrafiltration, nanofiltration, something that costs way, way more expensive. Probably at least an order of magnitude more.
And the water that is used after this, it can be used for any kind of crop, because I understand that crops that are like carrots and onions that are underground, they don't allow this kind of water to be used. They only allow it in orchards and trees. Is that, am I right?
Well, these water are allowed almost for anything, but you're right that in general in Israel, we, in addition to the numerical standards that we look for concentration and according to concentration of these different species of contaminants we do and do not allow, what we typically try to do in Israel is keep 2 barriers between the wastewater and the product that you eat. So potatoes, for example, you cook, so that's one barrier. You will kill microbes. Orchards like oranges, you irrigate and you also need to peel it. So you have the soil as one barrier and you have the peel of the orange as the second barrier. Probably you would not irrigate lettuce using those water because you eat directly the lettuce itself, even though the water is of high quality. But it's mostly as a measure of precaution. Practically, it's not really needed, but as a measure of precaution, we do not allow direct contact between the water and the eatable part of the crop.
Excellent. So lots of questions as usual. You always leave us with lots of questions and not enough time. But
Yeah.
I will, of course, send you an email with all the questions from the participants. And we thank you for this very enlightening talk, which has actually, sort of generated lots of thoughts in our mind and how we can, how this is applicable to the Indian context and how we can take this forward. So thank you so much, Alex, for your time. I know you have to go off for another meeting and you will be leaving this, but we will of course send you a recording because our next speaker is Vishwanath, who is going to talk about the Indian side and the Indian success stories of wastewater retreatment. So welcome to Vishwanath. Vishwanath, of course, is a dear friend and professor from the Azim Premji University. And he has actually been deeply involved in watershed management and other aspects of the Indian water scenario. He is going to take us through the Indian success stories and the strategies that have been adopted in India for wastewater reuse. Vishwanath, it's over to you.
Thank you. So I'll be talking and sharing my experience of engaging at different levels with the management of wastewater in the city of Bangalore in South India, right? So I call it reclaimed water management in a metropolis, the metropolis of a population of roughly 13 million people, bigger than Israel. Policies, practices, and challenges, and what are the kind of bylaws that have come in, what are the kind of investments that have been made in the project, and how is the informal sector dealing with it? So that's the scope of my talk. So let me see how, yeah. So can we just run the first poll question, please, as we read through this?
Yes,
so this is a bit of a trick question. So I hope that you people make a choice, and just as a caveat and a warning, we'll be running the same question at the end of the talk. So we'll figure out what happens, right?
So I will be stopping the poll in the next 10 seconds. I request all of you to please respond to the poll. Okay, I'm ending the poll. Let me share the results.
Great. So by a slight majority, agricultural reuse pips urban reuse, but there's quite a significant number of people who think that ecological reuse and industrial reuse are also ways of managing reclaimed water, right? So let's keep that in mind. That's a perspective that we have, and let me just run through how wastewater is being managed in the city. The city of Bangalore was one of the first to create a specialized institution to manage water and wastewater in a city in India. It was actually the first in 1964 itself. So we have a track record of a specialized institution. The city of Bangalore also has another challenge where the perennial source of water is 95 kilometers away and 300 meters below the city. It's a high pumping head. The cost of water is very high. It's 95 rupees a kiloliter. That's the actual cost of getting capital, OMEX, and a sinking fund. If you put it all together, the cost of getting 1 kiloliter of water to every household in Bangalore is 95 rupees a kiloliter. This has a very significant role, both in terms of the physical limitation of the water availability, as well as the cost for alternative uses to come to the fore, right? So that's something that we have to keep in mind. And I'll just give you a footprint. The figure on the left, the pink zone on the top is Bangalore City, Greater Bangalore City. And you see that the Kaveri River and the entire catchment, there are 4 dams there, only 2 of which you can see now. All these 4 dams or reservoirs operate to make sure that there is this volume of water, which comes down to a particular point from where it's pumped in 3 stages to get to the city. 3 stages of pumping, 95 kilometers and 300 meters head. Yeah. So significant part of the investment is done in the management of the water and getting it to the place. Currently, we get about 1,450 million liters per day into the city from the Kaveri pipe water supply. About 600 million liters per day, this is an approximation, comes from groundwater, right? So totally about 2,050 million liters per day is being consumed by the city of Bangalore. An additional 775 million liters per day will come from the river Kaveri as the last project from the river itself. So that's on the anvil and will come in another 2 to 3 years. The city has 1 million connections. And this is something nice about Bangalore. Every connection is metered. There's a volumetric pricing. So about 2 million households are connected to the water supply, about 9 to 10 million people. Roughly 2 to 3 million people are not connected to the grid, and therefore they depend on groundwater. There's a pro-poor policy by which poor households are given a free connection if it's less than 150 square feet. And if it's 150 square feet to 600 square feet in terms of the floor area of a house, they pay 25%. So there's an emphasis on getting as many people connected as is possible. And as usual in many cities, the periphery is the challenge, right? Because the city expands very fast, networks can't catch up with the expansion of the city. Like I said, metering is in place. Every connection is metered. To the right, I give you the increasing block tariff that Bangalore adopts. Bangalore has historically been doing volumetric pricing since 1934, right? So there's a domestic tariff, there's a non-domestic tariff, and there's an industrial tariff. And industries pay the highest amount of money. And within the domestic tariff, these are slabs, 0 to 8,000 liters, 8,000 to 25,000 liters, 7 rupees, 11 rupees, etc., etc. What it means is that if a domestic household consumes 20,000 liters of water a month, 20 kiloliters of water a month, given the production cost of 95 rupees, it gets a subsidy of 1,600 rupees a month. A domestic household gets a subsidy of 1,600 rupees a month. So that's something to keep in mind. Somewhere along the line, this pricing will have to change and more realistic pricings will have to come. Politically difficult. What it means also is the city has worked on alternative forms of water availability. Rainwater harvesting is now compulsory. Every house has to do rainwater harvesting. Rooftop rainwater has to be collected and either stored and recharged and reused. Wastewater recycling is compulsory, and I'll come to that. Groundwater management, there are rules and regulations, though not followed at all. There's metering in every house, and automatic switch off of pumps is mandatory. So if you are pumping water from your sump tank to your overhead tank, you have to mandatorily put in an automatic switch off pump, right? So that there's no wastage of water. So here are the rules. The one to the left is that every set of flats or apartments which are more than 20 in number have to have their own wastewater treatment plant. And as far as possible, they have to approach a zero liquid discharge, right? Which means that the city of Bangalore has given consent for about 6,000 smaller wastewater treatment plants all across the city. So there are a significant number of smaller wastewater treatment plants at apartment level and at layout level. To the right is the rainwater harvesting bylaw. So this I'll leave it with you. Later on, you can take a detailed look just to give you what's happening. So reclaimed water in a city like Bangalore, which is surrounded by a semi-arid hinterland, has many uses. One of the component is untreated wastewater. The other is the treated wastewater component, because the city does not collect every drop of wastewater and treat it. So there's quite a lot of untreated wastewater flowing in the rivers. The treated reclaimed water reuse has a prioritization or a competition between ecological environmental reuse, agriculture, and urban industrial reuse. And I'll explain through examples. Let's talk about untreated wastewater, completely untreated. This is the periphery of Bangalore, a small town, which is more or less attached to Bangalore now, called Vijaypura, 45,000 people. The town has a sewage network. It does not have a sewage treatment plant. So untreated wastewater flows out of the town in one drain. Here's farmer Muniraju. What Muniraju does is he picks up that untreated wastewater flow from the town, puts it into a small pond like such, allows the sludge to settle, puts in a pump, and then pumps the water to his fields. That's the wastewater, untreated wastewater, getting into the fields of Muniraju. He operates on a furrow irrigation method, not flood irrigation method. This is important because the farm workers will not be in direct contact with the wastewater. That's important. There are three sets of people who are at risk from untreated wastewater use. One is the consumer of the plants that or the produce from the untreated wastewater. Second are the farm workers. The third are the sellers, the people who transport the produce from the farm to the market. Now, how do we address all the three, and how do we de-risk all three? De-risking the farm workers is to go towards furrow irrigation from flood irrigation. Ideally, you would do drip irrigation, and some people are trying that. De-risking consumers is to grow a crop like mulberry. Mulberry is a leaf which is not edible. It's grown for a particular purpose. So you've de-risked the second, and you've also de-risked the transporter of the produce here. So all the wastewater generated from the town of Vijaypura is consumed by farmers, and over about 60 acres, they completely converted to mulberry leaves. The mulberry leaves are then taken, there's a premium price to it, and fed to the silkworm. The silkworm is a very sensitive worm. It certifies the quality of the mulberry leaf every day. So every day there's a certification, not with the pollution control board, but by the silkworm. The silkworm itself is then becoming a cocoon. And this is another very sensitive process. So if the leaves are bad, the cocoons will not form. The cocoons also certify the quality of the wastewater, the quality of the mulberry leaf. The cocoons are then spun into yarn. The yarn becomes the famous silk saris. And what farmers like Muniraju are doing are they've taken untreated wastewater. This is pure domestic wastewater, no industrial wastewater, converted shit to silk. They've created a livelihood for themselves. They've transformed so without any health risk or without any environmental risk, because the furrow irrigation makes sure that the water does not go below 3 feet, the root zone of the mulberry plant. There's no groundwater contamination. There's no health risk for the farmers, and there's no health risk for the consumers because mulberry is not used as a consumption plant. And in the process, they transform their own livelihoods and they become pretty rich farmers. Therefore, they're able to invest on-farm treatment. If you're able to help farmers like Muniraju to do better on-farm treatment with constructed wetlands and better sludge treatments, then they can better improve the safety and the risks of the property around. So this is one very interesting example that's going on in the surrounds of Bangalore. What happens to the wastewater from Bangalore, which is untreated? Now, if you look at the map of Bangalore from Google Earth, 2 rivers go out of the city. And these are now nalas, basically carrying wastewater. One of them is the Dakshin Pinakeni. And you look at the red arrow that I've indicated, the red color that I've indicated, the band. This red band is about roughly 60 kilometers. All of this is visually green even during summers. If you take a map during April and May, this place is green, right? You see the greenery around. Now, as the wastewater leaves the city, this is how it leaves it. Phosphates, detergents, froth and foam. And this is quite normal, right? But about 3 kilometers to 5 kilometers away, there's a stillness. The water is a lot clearer. Nature is doing its job. And wells are dug adjacent to the river or the drain, like you see on the left and on the right. And there are pump houses. These pump houses are more than 5,000 in number. And farmers use the pump houses and the well to pump water 17 kilometers, up to 17 and 22 kilometers, on an average 1 to 2 kilometers. This investment is being done by the farmers. The pipeline is by the farmers. The pump set is by the farmers, right? And then they collect it in a pond or in a well, right? If it's possible, they dilute it with groundwater from borewells, if the borewells have yield. Otherwise, they use it just after settling, right? And they use Israeli technology, making ROMIEL and the other Israeli friends happy. Netafim is being used by a lot of these farmers. They use drip irrigation after settling the water in the wells or in the pond. So they're marrying absolutely untreated wastewater with the latest technology in drip irrigation and bringing it together themselves without any assistance, right? And they use mulching, they grow crops, they grow various kinds of crops. Usually they prefer flowers, but they can grow also vegetable crops, right? And they can grow rice and millets. On the top left is millets, and on the bottom right is rice. They select the variety of rice which can best deal with the wastewater. There's a variety called Rajani. They'll select the variety of millets which can grow with it. Unfortunately, these people are not getting any assistance on how to better manage the risk and how to better manage the wastewater. Something that we need to think through, right? So what do farmers want if you talk to them? They say, please don't put industrial effluents in the domestic sewage. If it's domestic sewage, we are very happy. But if you get industrial sewage, we are in big trouble. Our plants die, our soil is contaminated, there's heavy metal coming in. Give us assured flows. Don't try and tamper with the flows. Tell us what the assured flow is and we will deal with it. Tell us what crop choice that we should have, which has a market, right? Flowers, for example, is something, but if you create a market for us with mulberry and silk, we'll be happy to do that, grow that. Give us advice on irrigation practice. How much should we irrigate? How should we irrigate it? Drip, furrow, what should be the method? And how can we improve water quality on the field itself, on-farm treatment and improvement of water quality? This is what farmers want. Unfortunately, in the current system, this advice is not coming to them. So perhaps we could work on that. 2 examples I finished with, untreated wastewater. Now I'll talk about reclaimed water or treated wastewater. The city luckily has a distributed set of wastewater treatment plants. Close to 36 now are either built or are being built. Some of the figures are old, but 36 will be functional by the end of this year, 36 wastewater treatment plants. And these are in 3 valleys in the city itself, right? So the brown, blue, and the gray indicate the 3 valleys. One of the valleys is the KC Valley or the Koramangala Chalagatta Valley, which you see in the figure on the right. This has a certain set of wastewater treatment plants from the Koramangala, Chalagatta, and Tabarekere Valley, right? This is how the KC Valley treatment plants look like. A series of wastewater treatment plants have come as the city has grown. And first you would have a 30 MLD old activated sludge process and so on, and it's gone on. There's a 218 MLD plant that has come. There's a 60 MLD plant that has come later. And now there's a 150 MLD plant, which is recently getting commissioned, right? So combined set of plants have come up, which are picking up all the wastewater and treating it. Now, what are the standards they are treating it to? So the NGT has put a ruling in April 19, and they follow the NGT standards, which includes phosphate less than 1, total nitrogen less than 10, right? So these standards are being adhered to by the plant. They also follow the norms set by the CPHEO for landscaping, horticulture, and agriculture on the top right. And you see the crops, top right, bottom, non-edible crops and crops which are edible. So they follow the treatment standards which are for edible crops and which can be eaten. That standard is met by the treatment in the wastewater treatment plants. And 810, the figure on the bottom right, is the total volume of treated wastewater or reclaimed water, which is now being sent to the drought-prone hinterlands of Bangalore, where farmers are in dire need of water. This makes it one of the world's largest reclaimed water transfer for agriculture purpose, next only to that of Mexico City, right? The number now has gone to 1,200 million liters per day. That's a set of projects which are on the anvil, and there is a competition from farmers and from the politicians to make more and more reclaimed water available to the farmers for agricultural use. So that's the kind of drive that is happening, right? So what then happens to the wastewater treatment plants? And I'll tell you the kind of investments that have gone into the treatment plant and the transfer to of reclaimed water to the hinterland. 1,280 crores or 12,800 million Indian rupees have been invested by the minor irrigation department to pick up the reclaimed water after treatment to pump it to these drought-prone districts, right? So there's a contractor there. Look at the distance that is traveled. So the map is very slow, but if you, very small in calibration, but if you take a look from where the arrow is at the bottom left to the top right, the distance is roughly 80 kilometers. So reclaimed water is being pumped 80 kilometers, right? And this is how the reclaimed water ends up in the lake. Gives you a canvas of the this is about roughly 60 kilometers, the kind of lakes that are being fed in one direction, in one of the valleys, by the reclaimed water from Bangalore. So Bangalore is now becoming a water factory and a fertilizer factory for its hinterland with its reclaimed water, right? And I'll just give you another example there. The red line is about 43 kilometers. That's the rising main from the reclaimed water plant to the first lake, right? About 43 kilometers of a rising main. 440 million liters being pumped into the rising main, right? And so this is how the sewage treatment plant looks like. You know that, and we know that there's a raw sewage in quality parameters. Most of us who are familiar with the sector understand that the BOD is roughly 230 to 250, sometimes 300. COD is 529. This is what we need to address, and it's all addressed in these wastewater treatment plants through redesign to get to secondary treated wastewater parameters, to get to the NGT parameters, and then it's pumped in through the rising main, and this is where it ends up. The rising main ends and the water now is reaching a lake. You can see the figure on the left and on the right. It's cascading down to the lake. These are how the lakes look like. That's the first lake on the left. It's full now. It cascades, overflows by gravity to a series of tanks. And then from the 7th or 8th tank, it is picked up and pumped again to the next level of gravity. And from there, it's again redistributed, right? And as it flows, the quality keeps on improving. And I'm just giving you how the lakes look like and how the delivery chambers look like. This is from the minor irrigation department. Lake after lake, tank after tank is filling up. 137 such lakes will be filled eventually. About 100 lakes have already been filled, right, in that one Kolar project. What is it doing? This is the pumping station from the gravity-fed tank, which is the 7th tank, the figure on the left with the blue and white stripes, from where another pumping rising main will go to the next set of tanks, right? Just to give you a flavor of the kind of tanks that have already been filled. And these lakes will be full throughout the year, 365 days a year, 366 every leap year, right? The first lake itself has been auctioned for fisheries by the local village government. There's a revenue to the local government. 500 kgs of fish a week is being harvested. The fish are also bioindicators of the quality of water, but each one of the tanks will have the potential for fisheries and therefore will be a source of income to the fishermen and to the villagers nearby. These then use the SAT model, which the professor was explaining in the beginning. No lake is allowed to directly give water to the farmers. It's only allowed to recharge, and from the aquifer, you're allowed to pick it up. Farmers pick it up from these open wells, which have regenerated thanks to the lakes being full. There's aquifer recharge, and cucumbers are being grown. And in many cases, the farmers are using drip irrigation to irrigate their fields from the open wells, right? So all these places where the groundwater table had collapsed to 2,800 feet have rejuvenated and open wells have water. The influence zone of each tank sometimes is up to 2 kilometers, depending on the hydrogeology and the groundwater profile. And it's transforming the livelihoods of farmers all across the hinterland. Not only that, it's transforming the ecology of the place. We've mapped 138 different species of birds alone in some of these lakes. So these lakes can be designed to be biodiversity hotspots. They can be designed to recharge the ground, and they can be designed for farmers, right? So there's the ecological concept of regeneration of the tanks and the agricultural component of regeneration of tanks, which goes together with reclaimed water, right? So I'll explain one particular case within the city, where within the city lakes are being rejuvenated for ecological purpose using reclaimed water. This is a lake called Jakkur Lake, which is in the north of the city. It's a 50-hectare water spread. I'll draw your attention to the red mark, which is a 15 MLD wastewater treatment plant. Below that is a constructed wetland, and below that is the lake, right? So this is the fixed film anaerobic reactor-based wastewater treatment plant, 15 MLD, costing about 60 crores. The sludge in the wastewater treatment plant sells as manure. The truckload of sludge goes for 10,000 rupees. There's 2 truckloads of sludge generated every day. 10,000 rupees is what the truck of sludge gets. It's used as a fertilizer, quality of the wastewater treatment. And then the treated wastewater is led into a constructed wetland for further polishing, right? It doesn't enter the lake directly. The wetland is a biodiverse space with the weaver birds, huge variety of birds. It's now the 4th highest bird biodiversity hotspot in Bangalore city. Lush with small mammals, reptiles, and avians. Very nice. From the constructed wetland to the lake, that's the quality of water that you get. Most of the phosphates are held in the constructed wetland if they remain at all. And then that's how the lake looks like. That's Jakur Lake for you. The fishermen cultivate livelihoods through fishes. If the lake is kept properly, it can generate 250 to 500 kgs of fish a day. Yeah, a kg of fish is about 150 rupees in Bangalore. And the painted stocks and pelicans have returned. Some of the painted stock have an Aadhaar card and a ration card and an electoral voter. They have refused to migrate. They want to permanently stay in Jakur Lake. These are the kind of transformation that cities can do with reclaimed water, ecological regeneration, groundwater recharge. The pelicans stay there. A pelican gobbles 4 kgs to 4.5 kgs of fish. A kg of fish is 150 rupees. That's 600 rupees per pelican without GST. That's the kind of challenge that we have. How do we persuade the fishermen and the pelicans to co-survive? Because for the fishermen, it shouldn't feel like the pelican is gobbling my fish. But in nature, there's enough for both the pelicans as well as the fishermen. These are the kind of interesting dialogues and conflicts that we need to resolve in our cities using reclaimed water. And of course, the lake recharges the aquifer. These beautiful heritage structures have come back to life. This water, with the minimal treatment, is good for drinking. So actually, wastewater has been transformed through a conventional wastewater treatment plant, a wetland, a lake, aquifer treatment into potable water. So if more and more lakes are regenerated this way, the city's water security is ensured and groundwater table comes up, right? So the city is planning a series of such small wastewater treatment plants next to lakes, more than 19 plus 4, 23 of them are already on the anvil, are being built. The challenge is how do you run them well, right? So this is the STPs that are proposed next to the lakes to reclaim water and to feed the lakes, right? And in Cubbon Park, one of the large parks which is irrigated only by reclaimed water, that's a 4 MLD MBR storage system running since 11 years or 12 years. And the treated wastewater is good for drinking, right? And so these demonstrations have to be learned from and have to be translated to scale and more actions. What happens at smaller scales, at a gated community or a layout level, right? This is a 36-acre gated community, the figure on the right, 360 plots or sites or 360 buildings come up there, villas as they're called in some places, right? What does the gated community do? It is not connected to the pipe network. What it does is it makes rainwater harvesting mandatory. Every household recharges rainwater into the aquifer, and there are only 3 community borewells permitted. No private borewell is permitted. So that 3 community borewells draw the fresh water, distribute it. Every house is metered. The community decides on the price, and it says 120 rupees a kiloliter if you consume more than 20,000 liters. So demand management has been brought down, recharge of the aquifer. From the monies that they have collected, they have invested in a phytorrid wastewater treatment plant. Yeah, this is how the phytorrid system looks like. This is by Niri in Nagpur, and treated wastewater is given to every site free of cost. So therefore, the net demand for fresh water dramatically reduces because gardening use is a very high use in these kind of slightly richer communities, right? So wastewater now supplements aquifer recharge and rainwater harvesting and groundwater management to make the community self-sufficient. But metering and pricing is crucial, right? That's one thing that we need to remember. What about apartments? This apartment called TZ is the first in India that we know of where it picks every drop of rainwater and puts it into the recharge well. There are 44 recharge wells, but it puts in by itself, and thanks to a gentleman called Shekhar Srinivasan, it puts the sand filter, carbon filter, chlorination, activated carbon filter, ozonizer, and an RO system, and actually blends its reclaimed water with fresh water and drinks it. And it's been doing so for 8 years. We talk about Singapore, New Water, we talk about other places, but here's an apartment demonstrating it can be done safely by itself with robust technologies which are available to everybody, right? So these kind of demonstrations are important to translate people to motivate people. The gentleman on the right in the blue shirt is the Pollution Control Board chairman, the then chairman who's drinking the water to say, okay, this is good enough to drink, right? And on the periphery of the city, these are treated wastewater, the periphery of the cities where the city is growing rapidly, look at that apartment. It has a large wastewater treatment plant, basically a glorified septic tank, right? Farmers enter a deal with the apartment and say, we'll put the pump, we'll pump it 1.5 kilometers. You give us the wastewater for free, right? So this is the deal. I'll pay for the electricity bill for the pump. So the apartment gets rid of its wastewater because it's got a surplus. It can't do anything apart from flushing its toilet. So it's got a surplus. So it's happy to give it to the farmer. The farmer is happy to take the wastewater and he grows marigold, right? So this is again a very costly flower, which is also sells very well. So again, it's being transformed, right? And so these treated wastewater is used through drip irrigation system to grow marigold, gets to the market of Bangalore, and then is used for even puja purposes, even in temples, right? So therefore, the cultural barrier is also sought to be overcome by folks. So what are then the key observations with this kind of informal wastewater use and formal wastewater use? The city-hinterland link is established, right? The city now becomes a provider of water and fertilizers to a vast hinterland, as I said. Agriculture is in a crisis, livelihoods are in a crisis, and if the city provides wastewater or reclaimed water to the farmers, the food security of the city is ensured. The farmers ensure a livelihood, and all drops of reclaimed water is captured. Farmers move quickly to non-edible crops if we can persuade or work with them and make sure that there's a market for the crop if it's untreated wastewater, right? Farmers report 60 to 70% less need of fertilizers with reclaimed water. So therefore, fit for purpose standards is what we need to use if we're going to use it for agriculture. Why remove phosphates and nitrates completely from the wastewater if in any case it's going to be used for agricultural use, right? If it's going to a water body, if it causes blue-green algae to develop, for sure, remove phosphates and nitrates. But if it's going for irrigation, let's be wise and let's say that the NGT order should not be a blanket order saying only one size fits all. Let's make it fit for purpose treatment. No formal institutional mechanism exists. So we should figure out how the agriculture department, the irrigation department, and the wastewater water utility board sit together to manage reclaimed water comprehensively, right? So that kind of mechanisms we need to create. A risk management approach can be adopted from the sanitation safety plan of the World Health Organization to make sure that if there are health risks and environmental risks, they are systematically addressed at every point of time. It doesn't cost money. There's a need to prioritize reuse between ecological, agriculture, and economic urban reuses, right? Because in our imagination, a lot of times, treated reclaimed water is for urban or industrial use, but agriculture has first charge in many places, and it can be done with ecological regeneration. You can ecologically regenerate lakes and rivers and provide water for agriculture purpose. So therefore, we need to find a formula to share this water between ecological, agricultural, industrial, and urban reuse. Fit for purpose, I already mentioned it. Emerging contaminants is an issue which we need to deal with scientifically. So professors and academics have to come in to help us address that. Industrial effluents need to be fixed. Domestic sewage is the easiest to manage. Industrial effluents is very tough to manage. Both should not mix. Wastewater reuse, I don't have to tell this committed audience, has tremendous potential and is already being used by farmers. We just need to formalize it and structure it. And ROMIEL, I promised you to do this in 30 minutes. It's 27 minutes and 47 seconds, ROMIEL. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Vishwanath. That was really to the point and very, very enlightening. And it's so nice to see positive things being done in some parts of India, at least, because we always hear the bad news. So it's great to hear the good news. My colleague, Dr. Samir Kulkarni, will take the questions. Samir, it's over to you.
Yeah, thanks, ROMIEL. First of all, congratulations, Vishwanath. I think, this has been, I think, one of those talks which really, actually seemed very encouraging. That yes, something great is or good and great is happening in a city like Bangalore, which has been developing phenomenally over the last couple of decades. So one of the questions that actually came up, which I think you have answered it in part, but perhaps you might want to throw in some details, is basically what's the status of the industrial wastewater in the sense is something being done with it?
So here's the answer, Dr. Samir. You know that how it is in all across India, right? The large industries do a phenomenally good job of picking up their industrial effluents and treating it. And they have a ZLD in place, and the large industries have the monies to invest. It's the small and medium industries which struggle. And the challenge is that in areas like Peenya in Bangalore, which is on the west of the city, there are quite a few of these small and medium industries, and there's no common effluent treatment plant which has been set up by the Pollution Control Board to help them. So therefore, it ends up with the domestic wastewater. And as I keep pointing out, and as we all know, how do we manage the small and medium industries, industrial effluent will be a bigger challenge for us than managing domestic wastewater.
One other question that has come up is, what do you think are the 2 or 3 main reasons that Bangalore has been able to successfully, implement this strategy and is able to reclaim this water? I mean, I would like to, ask over that. I mean, do you think the psychology and the people, forthcoming to do that was a major factor in this?
I'll give you one reason alone why this worked in Bangalore. Political will. One minister was politically committed to reuse of wastewater, and I will give his name also. His name is Krishna Bairegowda. He's in the opposition now. He was the then agricultural minister. He started to work on this reclaimed water in his constituency. The Jakkur example that I showed was in his constituency. And he was so convinced about the model that he rammed it through a very reluctant bureaucracy, a very reluctant academic circle, a very reluctant set of engineers. Actually, the opposition came from everybody else except the political leadership. And he drove it down the throats of all these guys and got all this treatment going.
Well,
So if we get a good minister who knows what he's talking about, as an educated minister, and then champions it, then problem solving becomes easy. Remember, the large-scale transfer of wastewater actually went to the Supreme Court. Environmentalists filed a case against it. It was fought in the High Court. It went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has eventually cleared it with an empowered committee to monitor it at a micro level. So you have to face the legal problems also.
And one question I had was like, so Bangalore, obviously, like, sitting smack in the center of the country, or rather, in the middle of the country in a way. There's vast land available, right, to actually manage this. So, how much overall land, approximately has been involved in these, lake generations and like, so sort of like multiple levels of water collections and moving, for the treatment purposes and all.
So when all the 1,400 million liters per day of treated wastewater or reclaimed water will go for agricultural reuse, as is being planned, 64,000 hectares of land will be irrigated.
I mean, how much was used to actually create this wastewater treatment, lakes and all that?
Oh, right. So what's happened, the model that has worked is that every lake gives up about 5% of its share to set up a wastewater treatment plant so that the 95% of the lake is saved.
Okay.
So the challenge is now the NGT ruling says that you cannot set up wastewater treatment plants next to lakes, right?
Oh.
So people, with all due apologies, the reality of urban India has to be faced. If we want to save the environment, we will have to make sacrifices. And it's up to the policymakers to formulate policies. The policymakers have abdicated the role and left it to the judiciary to set us laws, right? And the judiciary, unfortunately, does not have the requisite domain knowledge, though they are assisted by it, with all due respects to them. And this is the tragedy of India, that those who should be making policies and rules are not doing so.
Well, I mean, thank you so much. I think, like, again, this was one of those talks which really, I'm sure, had everybody in a way motivated and encouraged about the overall approach that Bangalore has taken. And hopefully, like, this gets in a way replicated in several different, other cities of India, cities as well as, like, maybe areas or geographies of India and across the world as well. I think, something like this, hopefully getting implemented in a very methodical and a planned manner should actually resolve a lot of issues which are associated with water. So once again, thank you very much. I mean, please go ahead. I mean, if you want to add something.
Yeah. I just wanted a minute, I forgot. Can we run the poll again once, please?
Sure, sir. I'll do it right away. I will be stopping the poll in the next 10 seconds. I request all of you to please respond. All right. So I am stopping the poll now.
Okay.
Let me share the results, sir.
Yeah. Well, at least some have been persuaded to look at agricultural reuse as one of the dominant reuses. That is quite significant because, what's happening in India is that the relationship between our rural hinterland and the urban one is one of conflict. The city is seen as an usurper of resources and does not leave anything for the rural hinterland except garbage, solid waste or something of the sort. We need to create a positive synergy, and can easily be done by reclaimed water, right? And in the process of agricultural regeneration, I have to re-emphasize, ecological regeneration can also occur. And so both of these hand in hand gives us great potential for many of the hinterland cities and towns, especially small and medium towns, to crack this with reclaimed water.
So one of our earlier talks, we actually had a poll which we're talking about wastewater, and the question was, are you going to actually, would you eat any foods that were irrigated from wastewater, or would you and 90% of the people at that poll said that they would not eat foods that were there. So what is your feeling on that? How to get over this sort of, because you have taken this marigold and you have taken silkworms, which is a brilliant solution. But I think it's a brilliant solution to a limit, because the amount of wastewater that is actually coming out, we'll have to actually diversify into crops or orchards, or as we discussed earlier. So what is your feeling on how to break that barrier?
So here's the thing. It's a peculiar urban construct. It's not anything to do with anything else but the urban lack of imagination. If you talk to the farmers, they've been using human waste, pig waste, chicken waste, poultry waste, you name it. Everything goes in as farmyard manure and it's being eaten, right? Now, bananas have been grown, papayas have been grown and have been consumed. As long as you don't know, you consume it. The yuck factor seems to emerge if you know about it. But if we look at managed aquifer recharge and say, okay, this is not reclaimed water, this is groundwater from the open wells, which is being used for drip irrigation. In a way, that is true, right? So you have to get rid of the yuck factor by using aquifers, by using wetlands, by using lakes, and transforming the nature of groundwater. People go to the well, directly drink from it. The one next to Jakkur, they drink from it. They don't know that's yesterday's sewage. Mm-hmm. They're happy to drink it because this is well water, it's holy and it looks clean. And if it's technically meets standards of drinking, what's the problem? So we have to be creative as engineers, as people, to do the distancing, not ram it down people's throats saying, oh, science says this is good enough to drink. Okay, let's respect the yuck factor. Let's work around it.
Excellent. I think you have actually answered a question we are searching for in our joint project. So which we're doing. But thank you so much, Vishwanath. This was really enlightening, and this is happy to see this positive things happening in Bangalore, and I'm sure it can be replicated. But as you rightly said, there has to be political will and some strong legislative backing for this kind of activity. And this, we don't have an option but to do this all over the country. The point is, when is it going to happen? That is critical, an issue. So thank you everyone for joining us for this amazing talk and this amazing series of talks. We have our last session, which we are going to have it on this Thursday, where we're going to talk to Dr. Nilanjan Ghosh from the Observer Research Foundation, who's going to talk about India's water wars. And we're going to have Dr. Pushkar from the Bombay University, who's going to talk about Mumbai's problems and the challenges in water and wastewater, which will have a different and probably an opposite point of view from what Vishwanath has discussed, and give us different facts on the challenges that that Bombay is facing. So thank you so much everyone for joining us. We look forward to meeting you all on Thursday for our last and concluding session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Roman. Thank you, Dr. Samir.